Great. Well, good afternoon. Great to, I think we need sunglasses up here.
Seriously.
Great to see everybody here. I'm Ben Gordon. I'm moderating this panel. So this is on the topic of data and analytics and transportation, which I guess is sort of the theme for everything in this conference. What I want to do is start and share a little bit of a perspective from the investor standpoint. I'm the managing partner at Cambridge Capital, which invests in companies in transportation, logistics, and technology. We also have an affiliated investment bank called BG Strategic Advisors. And I've been in this industry for over 20 years. In fact, I started my first company 20 years ago. And I remember my experience of data and transportation got off to a little bit of a rocky start. I was excited about going to a pitch meeting to meet with a $200 million truck brokerage and logistics company in Florida and pitch them on the SaaS TMS, a company called Threeplex that I'd started and we were building. And I remember going down and the CEO said, I want to meet with you and I want my whole management team there and you bring your management team as well. So I thought, it seemed like he was interested, right? So I won't name his name, although he's now part of one of the roll-ups in the space. But the CEO starts the meeting and he says, we're here to talk about data and technology. And then he bangs the table and says, let me get one thing straight here. I fucking hate technology. This was not a good start for the meeting, and he did not end up buying our data or our technology. So the industry's evolved quite a bit since then. And now, 20 years later, as I look at what's happening in logistics, it's amazing. I mean, this conference is amazing, and what you see all around really is the tremendous transformative impact of data in our industry. So I just want to share a perspective as to how we look at data from an investor standpoint, and I'll just give you a little case study. So we invested in a company 4 years ago at Cambridge Capital called Grand Junction. And Grand Junction was an e-commerce and last mile logistics technology company. And this will just give you a sense of where we look for data in order to make deal decisions, investment decisions in the space. So, you know, one thing that we look for is operating data. And so the metrics for a last mile logistics technology company like Grand Junction, well, what's your on-time delivery rate? How many carriers do you have in the network? Things like that. Second, we looked at financial metrics, like, well, what percentage of your revenue is recurring? Everybody, certainly on the technology side, loves to talk about how big the revenue is, but you know, recurring revenue is worth more, so how much of that's true software as a service recurring revenue? Or revenue per employee. Everybody in the sector loves to talk about productivity, but that's a pretty good test, you know. And if your headcount is stable while the revenue is spiking, clearly that's a great financial metric. And then of course valuation and EBITDA multiples, revenue multiples, et cetera. So, but getting into the guts of the data is pretty important, and it was pretty important in the work that we did with Grand Junction. And Grand Junction turned out to be really successful and sold to Target a year and a half ago. So I guess the data that they count now is how many millions of dollars they got for the business, which was pretty big. But the richness and value of data in this space is vital, and so I'm delighted to have three panelists who can share specific insights as to how each of you look at data from a macro standpoint as well as a micro standpoint. So I want to start with Cathy. Cathy, tell us a little bit about, from a macro standpoint, how do you look at data and how do you assess data integrity and what matters?
Okay. Well, I come at it from a marketing research perspective. So I'm building market sizing, rankings, and such as that. But as we all know, there is good data and there's certainly bad data. So out of curiosity, I'll ask y'all, I'm assuming all of you work with data. Is there anybody that doesn't work with data? Okay, cool. So how do you know if you've got good data? So I went out and did the traditional Google search and eyeballed the stuff. And I mean, it's really common sense stuff. It needs to be valid, needs to be up to date, needs to be relevant, and so on. So you've got to understand the basics first of what that data is. And particularly when you're looking to partner with an external data provider, such as FreightWaves, or any others for that matter, me, whomever. You need to ask questions. You need to partner up, and we all read this in various magazines, but it's true. You need to have a true collaborative relationship. You need to be able to ask your partner questions, such as, I don't understand your data. Where does it come from? What's the methodology? Methodology is huge. Now, grant you, if you ask me my methodology of market sizing, I'm not going to give you the entire secret sauce because that's kind of how I make money, kind of, sort of. But definitely, if the provider doesn't give you enough information, then that may not be the right provider for you. Again, just enough. There's a lot of indices out there. There's a lot of market sizes and rankings, and I see a lot of this out on social media. I'm fairly active on social media, and I have no problems calling out people that have really weird, oddball numbers that they're throwing out. I have no problem sitting there asking them, where'd you get that number from? Do you know how old it is? And 9 times out of 10, they can't answer it. You need to be data smart, particularly in today's time. I mean, if you're a startup and if you're going to get funding from an investor, the investor's going to ask you, how big is the market? And if you give them a number and they ask what's the methodology, what does this number mean? And if you can't answer it, they're going to show you the door 9 times out of 10. In fact, I had a client that happened to, and I had to go in and do some market sizing for him because he Googled, pulled a number right off of the search engine without even questioning it. So always question. And what may be good data for you may not be good data for the other. So it's really almost a subjective thing in a lot of ways, but it's what you're comfortable with.
Okay, thanks, Cathy. So, Chris, tell us about the TCA Profitability Program. What is it? How does it work?
Yeah, so what it is a benchmarking service. So it's both quantitative and qualitative benchmarking. So carriers who are my bosses, there's 204 of them in our program and growing. They have established a platform where they can share their financial and operational data both in an anonymous format and then in a non-anonymous format through what we call the best practice groups. So what that data does, it shows you how you're doing relative to your peers. It's an easy thing, but it also points you in the right direction in terms of what areas of your business you need to work on the most, and then taking it to the next stage, or there's 2 stages. Through the best practice groups, you can get the how. So you can understand what is XYZ doing to get their maintenance cost per mile down to 11 cents per mile compared to me at 24 cents. So it's a signal for them. And then part of my job as kind of a carrier, I consider myself a carrier advocate, is to point them in the direction to people like David to get into the micro things, so the transactional real-time stuff that they need to work on. So if their gross margin's not doing so hot, I know we can point them in the direction to David or another service to get them, working on their network and stuff that David's going to be talking about. But that's the program in a nutshell.
Great, thank you, Chris. So, David, Chris called you micro, so I think that was a good thing.
Micro, yeah.
I think it means you're close to the data. So, how do you use carrier data?
So our firm focuses on helping truckload carriers primarily, but carriers improve their profitability. And the primary way that we do that is by helping them understand their freight network. So we take data from the carrier's transportation management system and analyze that data. The first thing we do is we validate the data. So we make sure that we have what we call data alignment with our carriers, because it's really important that what we see in their TMS is aligned with what they see in their TMS. And that sounds really simple, but honestly, it's not always that simple. Once we have that data, we use software and algorithms to run the data through our programs to help them understand what shippers, what customers are profitable and not profitable, what lanes are profitable and not profitable, how they can change their flows. But it all starts out with that micro data that Chris is talking about. We also we have to have a variable cost that we use. So if they are a TPP client, we use the information straight out of the TPP beta database because that's already been vetted and it's something that we can trust. Great.
And so how does the benchmarking work? And how do you know the data is reliable, and what kind of conclusions can you draw?
So we benchmark rates. That's the biggest area that we benchmark. And we have a lot of people that go, well, how does our rate compare to the national average rate? And honestly, that's irrelevant because, that's just a giant average of averages, right? So what we do is we take our carrier's data and we look at it on every lane and compare that to a rate index. And then we aggregate that up to what we call a pricing variance to see how far off are they from, if they had raised everything to market, how far are they away from that market? And it's interesting the times have been going on because it's really changed. Right now, most carriers are about a 6% variance. Prior to the run-up of 17, 18, they were in the 3% range, which really means there's not a ton they can do to change their price. They're pretty much fully priced. So that's an example of the benchmark.
Great. So I want to ask a question to the panel, and feel free to answer, just jump in. Who do you think is doing a great job of using data in order to boost their profitability? Any case studies or examples of carriers that come to mind?
We have a group of 20 carriers within the program, which we call the High Performers Index. So the common denominator among all those that are in it is, number one, they're highly profitable, but second, they have custody and control of their data. And that's something in the general trucking market a lot of companies don't have. They don't understand how they can access their data, their databases, and utilize it. But the carriers in that group, I can't name who they are, but the common denominators they can access, and they do a lot with their data. A lot of the stuff that you see here, they're building proprietary tools to do internally, and it's working.
And tell us more about, if you can't name names, illustratively, what would someone in that 20 group be doing that somebody else might not be doing?
Well, the big kick right now is using the ELD data as a denominator in a lot of our KPIs. So we're now getting the active driving hours and active non-driving hours and using that as the denominator instead of miles, trucks. So they're actually seeing what the gross margin is per active driving hour or their wages per hour. And trucking companies are selling time. And that's been a big change for us. And that's because the top performers are telling us that's what they want to see. So that's an example of what they're doing.
Great. I'll follow up on that a little bit because in our calculation, we have this magic metric called yield, which is basically margin divided by time. So how much margin are you generating in a given time period? And it's really amazing how terrible that our carriers are typically mid-market carriers, 100 to 800 truck carriers. It's really amazing how terrible that their time data is, their date time stamps when they arrive at a shipper, depart at a shipper, arrive at a consignee, depart at a consignee. We look at, when we do this data alignment, we look at how many of their calls fall into different tranches, and the first one is 0. So they arrived at the same time that they departed, right? And we'll see a lot of times 50, 60, 80% of the times they're in there. So, I mean, it's a time-based business like Chris is talking about, but the carriers don't seem to invest the time and the training to curate this really important data. So from our standpoint, it's really great that we're able to go to the ELDs and get that information straight. Forget the TMS, forget what the dispatchers are doing, but take it, really straight from the horse's mouth and use that data. We're just beginning that journey as we speak right now. I'd follow up on that too. One other thing is I think that the enterprise carriers, the much larger carriers, My belief in having looked at a number of their data sets is that they do a much better job at managing that. They're much more diligent in how they manage their data so that they can be more precise when they're looking at productivity by driver or profitability by customer or whatever metric they're looking at.
And what are the best sources for this data? You mentioned ELDs as superior to TMS for a lot of this. Tell us more, an open question for the panel. What are the best data sources for carriers looking to make better decisions?
Well, I'll just start off. Yeah. On the financial side, our biggest data set is the GL data, the general ledger data that we get from carriers. It is lagging, but that's where the main data that we get is from that. And then we pair that with the operational stats, the miles of trucks, the drivers, and now the ELD data. So that's the main, what we're using now. And then a lot of our carriers are starting to implement tools such as Sonar or build their own tools within Power BI or Tableau to consume data and put it in front of the people that are making decisions on the front lines. So,
go ahead. I'm sorry.
No, you're fine. No, I was just thinking. I spent about 11 years with UPS, and we had one of the largest data warehouses around. But we kept it to ourselves. We never sold the data and refused to do that because, we believe in maintaining good relationships with our customers. I think a lot of the good data sources came from the customers themselves. We would put all of that into the data warehouse and then use that to improve the service levels and such, and we'd find where our pain points were, and we would focus on that, using the data from the clients, from our carriers, our partners as well.
I think that a lot of, historically, the carrier data has come primarily from the TMS, so it's come from the inside, and it's homegrown, and it doesn't really look outside, so it's hard to benchmark, against yourself. You have to benchmark against yourself to have continuous improvement, but you also have to know how your metrics fit within the terms of what others in the industry are doing. So programs like the TPP, where you're able to benchmark on both financial and operational metrics against competitors, peer groups, I think are really great. Rate indices, there's a number of them available. I think you have to go outside and see how you are comparing, how your rates are comparing. Again, not just on average, but on a lane-by-lane basis, how your rates are comparing. And incidentally, on that note also, we compare not just against the outside, but we look at within the freight that you're handling, are there arbitrage opportunities that you have where on a given lane you're getting much more money from one shipper versus another shipper? And this whole ELD data and all this transparency stuff that is the topic of this conference, I think that there's going to be more and more data that you're able to bring in that's outside data, that's not homegrown, where you're going to be able to layer that over what you're actually doing.
So let's talk about what's missing. Sometimes people don't know what's missing. I mean, Steve Jobs famously said, market research is a great way for people to tell you how to get a slightly better version of what they already have instead of something that's transformative. Mm-hmm. So this is inherently hard to know, but when you talk to carriers, what do you think is missing that they'd like to have? Are there certain data sources or answers or tools that they'd like?
The one part of our program is the qualitative benchmarking. So these carriers get together, they share best ideas and sometimes bad ideas, and that's kind of the thing that needs to spread more. That's the real value in our program, is getting the how out of fellow carriers. So having a forum to do so is very important. They're putting out fires constantly all day long. They need, some direction. And that qualitative data is the telling them what to do if they have an issue in one department or one area of their business. So.
One example in our practice, our freight network engineering practice, is we go in and we go through what we call freight network assessment or an ongoing engagement, and we tell people what's good, what's bad, why are you going, this area is terrible for you, this area is great for you, and they go, well, what should I do? Because all we're doing is telling them how they're doing with what they have. So being able to have more data, we have ways that we do that within their current geography, but if they're a Southeast carrier and they want to go to California, it's very difficult for us to, because we don't have the data sets. We have the rates from the rate indices that we can use, that we can plug in and kind of tell them, but we can't give them a really good answer, like using information that Cathy might have about, you know, what's going on in a different market, because all we know is what they're doing. We know what other clients are doing, but we're not really able to share that with, you know, across our client base.
And I think also, I get asked a lot for, I need more current data, like an hour ago or 15 minutes ago or, you know, now. So real-time data is what a lot of folks are looking for, whether they're carriers or the forwarders or the 3PLs. I play more in the 3PL forwarding space, so I'm learning a lot about the carriers, but yeah, a lot of it is that good, valid type of data.
So Cathy, you talked about your time at UPS. UPS was legendary for all kinds of data, including the no left turn rule and plenty of others. What kinds of things was UPS doing a decade ago that you think is catching on in the rest of the industry?
That's a good question. I think they're doing a number of things. Now, mind you, I haven't been with them for a few years, but I think the data warehouse that they had built over the years, and that was a homegrown thing, it's absolutely amazing. It was one of the largest. I was told at the time that it was one of the largest data warehouses available. And the thought that they never decided to monetize it was always amazing to me, and speaks volumes of what a great company I think UPS is. And but the way they were able to utilize that data in the form of, I mean, they created a lot of different service levels because of the customers needing faster delivery times, and that has caught on to the point of, you know, one-day delivery, thank you Amazon, and things such as that. So I think there's a very nice appreciation for that data warehouse type of solution.
Sure. So let's talk about pricing. So Chris and David, when you look at the trucking world, you know, prior to 1980, there was no judgment around pricing. The rates were all set. Now, of course, nearly 40 years after deregulation, that's one of the big variables. How are carriers changing the way they think about pricing? You know, we've got tools here. I mean, FreightWaves, shout out, you know, Sonar and various other data tools that are here at this conference. What do you think are the most important tools that carriers are using for changing how they price?
On a specific item, the detention time and bringing that to the forefront through Sonar, and then having people talk about detention time more within their operations, small, medium, and large, has been a big change. And now you're starting to see pricing tools built by these carriers to incorporate detention time in pricing, as well as customer scorecarding. And so the shippers are hearing it. So I think that will improve profitability for carriers, and I think shippers are going to have to clean up their act in that regard, and that's been a big change.
And I think knowing your cost, I mean, time is obviously an important cost and element when you're doing pricing. One thing that we see a lot, I'm speaking specifically about truckload carriers, is that they tend to confuse the market rate with the price that they need on a specific piece of business in order to be profitable. So the market is what all the other people are doing, and that lane may or may not fit in terms of your freight network the way it fits in terms of somebody else's freight network. And there's a lot of, when you're looking at these indices, it's a bunch of data, and it doesn't mean that it's sophisticated carriers or you don't know what's going into it. It's data. So I think understanding, you need to know what the market rate is. I mean, somebody talked the other day about, you know, the invisible hand of Adam Smith. I mean, he's there, and the market sets the price, or at least it sets the cap in most cases. But you need to understand, what price do I need on a specific piece of business, giving my freight network, the conditions in my freight network, in order to be profitable. And most people don't really understand that.
You know, you guys all have clients in the transportation industry, and I'd be interested to hear, how do you think the questions you're getting asked today are different from, say, 10 years ago? Are there certain kinds of questions about data or certain needs that you see today that you didn't see a decade ago?
Well, I can speak to my time. It's a shorter framework. It's a time frame. It's 5 years, but it's all, a lot of the conversations center around either data or training and development. So how do we build up these people in order to use our data better and build a better, more profitable company? So understanding how to take control of your data, have read-write access to your databases without having to wait in a queue for an outside party to handle. So that's been a big change.
I think they're just looking for more sophistication. I think carriers in general understand that you can't just, we have a saying, trucking for fun is no fun. And you can't just truck for fun anymore. You have to understand how you fit into the freight network and where you fit and how your costs, using your costs, what you need in order to be profitable.
What do you think, Cathy?
I think from my perspective, my clients want more data, more, but they also want to have the ability, they want the story behind the data. What does it mean to them? And what does it mean to the market? What does it mean to their from a competitive standpoint? So they're asking more questions around that whole circle for me. So really putting me on the spot, which is fun, which is great.
We are almost out of time, and I realize lunch is next door, so it's always a fun spot to be. So I'm going to ask one final question for the panel, and it's the prediction. So if you look forward in your crystal ball, which with perfect data would give you great insight, what do you think will be the most important data tool that a carrier could use, say, over the next 3 years in order to make his or her business more profitable or more successful? What would be your number one prediction for what they could use?
You're saying other than our proprietary tools?
You can say that if you want.
No, I think the tools like we're seeing that are being developed here, I think it's mind-blowing to see what's happening. That Sonar product is fantastic, and I think the iterations of that and some of these other tools come along that I don't know which one it is, but I think that there are just fantastic things being developed.
And I would say it's not the tool, it's the data itself. So Sonar, you can use it with their application, or you can use it via API. And that's where I see the big value is, because everything operates on typically one screen in a trucking company. It's the TMS. So being able to feed data from Sonar, from our tool, from David's tool into a one central location or dashboard is going to be is the big trend, and it's going to affect profitability. So.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. I think keeping it all in a single location, a single space is the way to go.
Yeah, you have to be application agnostic if you want to succeed in this. So.
Excellent. Well, we are exactly on time for the end. So Chris, David, Cathy, thank you. Appreciate it.
Thank you.